Ah, Nintendo, surely they, the almighty bastions of perfection, have done nothing wrong over their long and storied reign at the top of the industry, right? Right? Answer me! Yes, the fact is that even the companies held in the highest regard have made some pretty massive stumbles along the way. What matters, of course, is how the company managed to recover from those stumbles, but that's much less fun to talk about. So today, we're going to focus solely on the most foolish things Nintendo has ever done. We'll be looking at a mix of examples, and I should mention, even if something on this list was financially successful, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a good decision. If Nintendo's credibility took a hit, we're counting it. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst decisions Nintendo ever made. Number 10. Limited availability of Super Mario Bros. 3D All-Stars and Super Mario Bros. 35. I'm sure you've all heard of FOMO. It's exactly like YOLO, only with a different spelling, pronunciation, and meaning. FOMO is the fear of missing out, and it's been a marketing ploy for many years now. Sales and discounts are effective ways to FOMO people into buying things quickly, and telling people that a product isn't going to be around forever makes them even more likely to panic buy. This is what Nintendo did with Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which was no longer available for purchase as of March the 31st, 2021. So, of course, everyone needed to buy it as quickly as humanly possible. While limited availability is sort of understandable for Nintendo hardware, such as the Game & Watch reissue and even the Switch to an extent, to do it with software is just shameful, especially when there's no real reason to remove it from digital storefronts. Speaking of which, the download-only Super Mario Bros. 35 is technically free, but its limited availability was a way to sell Switch Online memberships. If it were around forever, chances are people would only buy a month of the subscription to try it out. If they say it'll be around for only 6 months, people will buy 6 months so they don't miss out. I'm onto you, Mario. I knew you were an arse ever since you imprisoned Donkey Kong. Ah, got you, bud. Number 9. Selling Rare. Truly iconic game studios are... What's the word? It's right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, Rare is one of those very studios. Responsible for such beloved titles as Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, GoldenEye 007, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, the British studio was a gaming institution for many years. But in 2002, Microsoft swooped in and bought the studio and thus signalled the end of Rare as a competent game developer. The likes of Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo did appear early after the acquisition, and they were fine, but by the time the Xbox One rolled around, Rare was stuck making Kinect games. What a waste. While losing Rare didn't seem to harm Nintendo in the long run, you've got to wonder what we could have today if Rare was still a part of the family. Instead, they're languishing at Xbox, producing additional content for Sea of Thieves. Number 8. The Switch's myriad issues. The Nintendo Switch is undoubtedly a success. Its multifunctionality as both a handheld and a home console is exceptional, and it is selling incredibly quickly. However, for as much as the Switch does right, there's a lot it does wrong. The device has a number of genuinely confounding issues. For example, Switch Online is weak and not really worth the subscription price. Nintendo going with an accompanying social app instead of integrating one is baffling. Third-party support is choppy at best, with far too many AAA ports being broken. The initial 32GB memory card is frankly pathetic when single downloadable games can fill the entire thing. And we can't forget Joy-Con drift. Don't get me wrong, the Switch is a good console, and it's not to say that the competition is perfect, but don't let that distract from the problems. Like the fact that I still can't play Princess Tomato in the Salad Kingdom with my NES app. Does anyone at Nintendo even care anymore? Number 7. The Genesis versus the NES. The NES was a revelation. Its US release pretty much single-handedly saved the industry from the video game crash, and it's responsible for some of gaming's greatest franchises. However, it did last a bit longer than it should have. Nintendo's 8-bit console appeared in Japan in 1983. 2 years later, the Sega Master System joined it. The pair lived in 8-bit bliss until 1988, when Sega launched the 16-bit Genesis, or Mega Drive if you want to get serious about this. The NES had vastly outsold the Master System, partly due to its 2-year head start. Perhaps emboldened by this success, they decided to stick with the NES instead of jumping to a 16-bit console themselves. Nintendo only launched the SNES 2 years after the Genesis. This wait resulted in Sega gaining a major foothold in the market and closing the sales gap considerably. It's not as though this decision signaled the end of Nintendo, but it does make you wonder why they waited so long. This trend of being late to the party happened again with the N64, and while they did try to get back on track with the GameCube, it was too late. Good thing they gave up on the supposed console war and stuck to making handhelds and Wii Sports instead, eh? Number 6. Friend codes. Usually, systems develop over time to become easier to use or to comprehend. Tech is confusing after all, especially to those not in the know. So you'd expect a brand like Nintendo to streamline everything and make it palatable to the masses. Well, for their online play at least, it turns out that Nintendo drew far too much inspiration from Superman 64 and decided that the best course of action would be to get their players to jump through hoops. That analogy was rubbish. I do apologize. Rather than traditional usernames, Nintendo went with friend codes, claiming it would be simpler. Anybody who has ever dabbled with any Nintendo online system knows that this is definitely not the case, unless you feel that 1652-7899-8012 is easier to remember than Mario Fan 98. Friend codes are just one of the ways in which Nintendo seems to actively discourage online play. Not only are their online systems shaky to begin with, take the Smash Bros. Ultimate fiasco for example, but they seem to have no interest in actually pushing the concept, despite online console multiplayer being a key industry focus since the early 2000s. Then again, Nintendo being a step behind isn't exactly new, now is it? Number 5. They stopped innovating for a bit. Some of you may know the name Gunpei Yokoi. Admittedly, my pronunciation may not help you recall the name, but you get the point. Yokoi's legacy of success includes creating the Cross D-pad, the Game & Watch series, designing the Game Boy, and producing Metroid, Donkey Kong, Mario Bros, and Kid Icarus. No, not that one. At least I don't think he produced that one. Right, that one, yes. But it was Yokoi's concept of lateral thinking with withered technology that caused problems for Nintendo for a while, at least. The philosophy states that Nintendo takes older, cheaper tech and does creative things with it. This ideology made the Game & Watch NES and Game Boy successful, but success is never guaranteed. After Yokoi left in 1996, Nintendo stopped bothering to be innovative, sticking to cheap tech for their consoles, only upgrading it as it became cheaply available, and rarely doing anything interesting. This was the case with the N64, the N64DD, and GameCube. The system of imaginatively using older tech came back with the Wii, which used some of the GameCube's hardware but innovated with creative motion controls. It's one thing to stick to a philosophy, but their lack of forward thinking during the mid-1990s to mid-2000s caused a shift in the industry, opening up plenty of room for their competitors to steal the spotlight. Nintendo might as well have just advertised for Sony and Microsoft with how little fight they put up. Number 4. The Wii U and Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Attempting to capitalize on the success of the Wii U landed in an awkward middle ground between its predecessor and what would eventually become the Switch. It was an interesting idea at least, not a good one, but interesting. Even if the Wii U was a bad home console masquerading as a limiting handheld, a good game library could have saved it. This is where Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival comes in. Amiibos are a fun and harmless, if not far too expensive, Nintendo creation. Amiibos differ from Skylanders, Disney Infinity, and LEGO Dimensions in the important sense that they are still profitable. By 2015, Wii U owners were craving something that would make their purchase seem worth it. Excitement was high when a new Animal Crossing game was coming to the platform, until the announcement trailer anyway. I'll just leave this like to dislike bar here, and oh, how about this Metacritic score too? I think that about sums it up. Number 3. Nintendo vs modders. Mods are good. They can increase the lifespan of certain games, improve underlying issues the devs originally missed, and even finish abandoned projects. You'd imagine that every right-thinking studio would want to push them. Not Nintendo though, who'd likely rather see a modder shot than touch the plumber. Possibly their worst anti-modding campaign was when they outright destroyed the Smash Bros. Melee tournament scene by issuing a cease and desist to the company that was using a mod to host the event. It was especially puzzling as Nintendo officially abandoned the game in 2007 when the GameCube was discontinued. They've been handing out cease and desists like coins in New Super Mario Bros. 2 for many years now, banning anyone who even imagined the words mod and Bowsette. They once shut down a Super Mario 64 PC port, which is at least understandable, but we can't help but wish they'd embraced the work modders had done instead of crushing it. Remember Black Mesa? Number 2. the Sony Philips debacles. A very quick summary: Nintendo wanted to release a version of the SNES with a disk drive and were to work with Sony to build it. It was pretty much ready to go and had an existing prototype. Then Nintendo pulled out and left Sony looking a bit silly. From here, Sony decided to push forward and make their own console, that being the PlayStation. You may have heard of it. Nintendo then did the exact same thing with Philips. Philips went on to create the CDI and used their license agreement to create the worst Zelda and Mario games imaginable. From this double bout of indecision, Nintendo unwittingly created the most successful console manufacturer ever and also ended up with the permanent blemishes on their two best franchises. Simply terrible. Then, they didn't even go with a disk drive for the N64. That's a new level of stubbornness right there. Number 1. Nintendo versus content creators. Once upon a time, Nintendo started the Creators Program. What this meant was anybody who made a YouTube video that used Nintendo licensed footage would lose a chunk of their ad revenue to Nintendo. Anybody not in that program, well, Nintendo would take all of the ad revenue. Thankfully, this was eventually discontinued and Nintendo loosened its grip a bit, but the damage was already done. Nintendo was not only losing credibility and coming off like a child having a tantrum, but they were losing what is literally free advertising. It'd be understandable to limit narrative spoilers or late-game surprises, but I could have told you the plots of Super Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild back in the late 80s, and I didn't even exist then. Wait, hang on. Should we be using Nintendo footage? Should we even have made this video? Oh, please don't be mad, Nintendo. I'm sorry, I'll buy a Wii U and 18 Amiibos. I promise, just don't take our ad revenue, please. We need it.